Hey, this is Jimmy Jab. You're listening to Motor City Rock Talk. Today I have an artist, guitarist, bassist, vocalist who performed in several groups in the Detroit area for many, many years, starting back in the 80s. Some of the bands he played in would be Airstrike with Chuck Burns, who later on obviously was with Seduce, the Ragdolls, Briton, Loudhouse, and probably his most recent, as far as I know, would have been Mog Stunt Team. Anyway, my guest today is that artist, Kenny Five. Hey, Kenny, how you doing, man?
Wow, that's a long list of names there. I'm doing great, and thanks for that great introduction.
No problem. Let's start out with a little background. Tell me a little bit about where you're from originally, and maybe some of the artists or bands that inspired you growing up.
Sure. I was born and raised in Livonia, Michigan, and product of the Livonia school system. And my parents had a record player, which was great. Back then, everyone's parents had a record player.
Yeah.
And I forget what birthday it was, but my dad I had a pretty insane dad. He bought Alice Cooper Killer's record.
Oh, wow.
And it had the poster in there where you opened it up and it was like a calendar, and Alice Cooper's hanging in there. And we had that record. And then, I don't know, we got Elton John's Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, and it had that just crazy ass cover with all this stuff. So my mind started to peak, and then we got into some Jeff Beck, and then we heard me and my brother. I have a brother named Sid, who was a bass player, real righteous bass player. He's a producer and plays out in California for quite a few years now. But anyhow, me and Sid discovered Iggy Pop, I Want to Be Your Dog. Yeah, after that, having the Cooper and, just getting to listen to some of those cool records at an early age, that's what piqued my interest in music. And then my old man goes as far as to get me tickets to see Kiss at Olympia. It was my first concert. That was Kiss Alive 2, and that was probably life-changing. I could, feel the fire. I was on the main floor, standing on top of the chairs. It was like a movie, collecting the confetti off the floor after the show. So that was life-changing. So that was sort of the beginning, I think, those records and then that Kiss concert.
Oh, yeah. Heck, that would be an incredible first concert.
And hearing that Killers record as a kid, when they did the Execution, and just, that stuff was just, like polarizing to me.
Oh, yeah.
It was really, really forceful. And I think, or I know for a fact, that kind of stuff set the fire and all that theatrics and all that stuff. Always been a big fan of that.
So let's talk about your early bands. Like I mentioned in the intro, Airstrike, Ragdolls, Briton. What was your first band that you actually would have gone out and like performed with in the clubs or the bars?
Well, what's funny real quick is I went to Riley Junior High, and I went to school with Corey Clark from Warrior Soul. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that band.
Great band, I interviewed Corey.
Rock and roll, so you know what he's all about.
Oh,
and so I went to junior high with that guy, and that guy was insane. So he had a band called The Attitudes, and I had a band, I think, with, of all people, Ed Hillman from the Meanie. That was my first band that I started playing out with, was with Ed Hillman, and we played basement parties and backyard. This is like in high school, and backyard parties and just all that kind of stuff. So it was really neat going to school with a couple of those kind of fellas that went on to do, really excellent stuff.
What was the name of the band you were in with Ed at that time?
That band, believe it or not, was called Anthem.
That's cool.
Yeah, we liked Rush. I mean, we were kids. I think at the beginning, my mom and dad were like dropping me off over there to rehearse. I remember we played somewhere, I was just thinking about this before you called, that we played somewhere that served alcohol, so our parents had to come. It was like one of those kind of bands.
Yeah.
So, but that was the first time I really did that. And I got to play like at Riley because Corey Clark had all these bands, and Ed had all these circle of people that played. It was a really interesting mishmash of, I don't know, a bunch of cool music at an early age.
Now, were you actually playing an instrument in these bands, or were you just singing at that time?
I'd sing and play guitar. I've always played guitar, singing my main instrument, a little bit of both. A lot of that stuff, At the same time, it's funny because I listened to an interview that you did with Chuck Burns, and he was talking about going to this record store. At the same time, I was going to the same record store Chuck Burns was.
Mm-hmm.
So after all that stuff with like Ed Hillman and those guys, I sort of started, I think it was the Westland Mall had a record store in there, and the guy like had a bunch of metal records, and he sat behind the counter. His name was George Sipley, and he played like a Flying V or a Destroyer. Chuck was going in there, I was going in there, and that's sort of how I got from the school thing into hanging out with Chuck. We started doing a bunch of cool stuff because we started playing like at Blondie's.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was still in high school when I was playing at Blondie's, but that's when I bumped into Chuck, and we would go to the same record stores, seeing all that. I think it was Kerrang! Magazine that we first, started reading and seeing about Motorhead and, just Maiden and UFO and Sabbath and all these cool bands. So
one of the record stores, would that have been maybe Rock of Ages? Do you remember Rock of Ages?
I totally remember Rock of Ages, but this was way before that.
Oh, okay.
This was called Off the Record.
Oh, I remember Off the Record. Yeah, okay.
We would go in there, and it's just like Chuck said, we were like seeing these bands. We were like, we want these records, we want to be able to buy these records. So eventually that stuff started coming in. I mean, just crazy stuff. And I remember Chuck had like the best Motorhead collection, better than anybody. I remember going over to his house, and he just had tons of those records. So
when then did you start performing with Chuck as far as Airstrike?
That was, again, sort of in between, as that, it was still in high school. I don't know that I forget exactly when that was, but at that same time, we started to get to play with Seduce before they were Seduce.
Sparks.
They were Sparks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we did that, but it's sort of like around high school time, because I think Chuck was in just graduating high school as well.
Now, do you remember where, like, for example, you say in your opening for Sparks, where that would have maybe been? Were you talking Blondie's or some of the other clubs, the Token or something like that?
No, they weren't playing those clubs that I know of. This was like, forgive me, I might be wrong geographically, but it was like somewhere up north, like Port Huron.
Oh,
okay. There were like these clubs up there, and Chuck knew those guys, and Chuck was really great friends with Mickey.
Yep.
Mickey would get us these slots open where we'd go up there and we'd spend like 4 days. And I was still in high school, so it was cool. And I'm like up there, and we'd stay at a hotel, or they'd know somebody, and everyone would sleep on the floor. And the specific night I remember was the night that they started auditioning people for what would eventually become Seduce, which was cool.
Who were they auditioning? Are you talking about vocalists like Mark Fennell?
Yeah, Mark Fennell, and there was a couple different people that came up there and sang, because they had this venue was just during the day, nobody was there, so they went in there, turned on the PA, they all played, and they started auditioning. There was a female vocalist at the time, I don't remember her name, but she wasn't there.
Yeah. That would have been Gwen,
Yeah, those fellas were like scouting out the next big thing, which was great. It was cool just again to be for me, I'm in high school and I'm like getting to play some cool shows. And I remember I did the Alice Cooper thing. You'd have been proud. I had the sword and the dolls and all that kind of crazy stuff. Yeah, I was just, living, the stuff that I saw. So
were you guys in that band opening for Seduce, or I should say Sparks, forgive me. Were you doing any original material that time, or were you doing pretty much all covers?
All really crazy covers, all that really odd European metal, and then crazy US metal like Riot, and what else do we do? I forget, but I just remember it being all that, real heavy, like I said, UFO and early Motorhead and Tigers of Pantang, and just, all that kind of, crazy ass shit.
So how long did you stay with Airstrike? How long did that last?
It sort of ran its course. At one point, I picked up the bass, and we started playing three-piece. It was Chuck and that guitar player from the mall that would be playing behind the counter, and myself. And then somehow I got introduced to the guys from Britain, and that became like sort of the next step for me, which they were again super heavy metal band, just playing all from Van Halen to a lot of covers, playing at Blondie's, playing at Token Lounge and whatever that other place, Studio Lounge. Yeah. Really cool. Just, again, heavy metal. I was still sort of just getting out of high school. That was sort of like, I think the next step was, getting introduced to those guys. Somebody introduced me to them. I sort of auditioned and just, we started playing together.
Now, were you in that group, Briton, before the Ragdolls then?
Briton was before Ragdolls. So eventually then what curves next is that drummer moves away, and I had gotten to be, Mickey St. Clair was so cool to us back then and just really nice about, I don't know, when we play, and encouraging and inspiring to see somebody with that power behind the drums. Even as a singer, I was like, I want to do that. So somehow I talked to Mickey. I sort of lied. I told him the band was like really old Aerosmith and the guitar player was a lot like Joe Perry. Got him to come over and audition, and he hit it off with Mike, the guitar player, and Louis Simon, the bass player. And those guys have played with a ton of bands around Michigan. What was that other band Mickey had with, the keyboard guy from Kid Rock? The Gravediggers.
Yeah, the Gravediggers. Before we get too far, I want to ask you something. My director-producer, Robin Miller, sent me a little flyer that you had when you were in Britain that said you guys were playing at Blondie's with special guest Pantera. Did Pantera actually open up for you guys?
You know what? To be honest with you, if they did, I don't remember.
Okay.
And if they did, it would have been because they were, they sort of had not a sort of glammy thing in the first very, very beginning. I just don't know if they toured, and I don't know. I remember a lot of stuff, but that escapes me.
He said for me to definitely ask you about that because...
Interesting.
Yeah, but I guess it would have been if it was real early for them, weren't known yet, nationally or otherwise, that would be possible. I was just going to say, if they were at their Blissistic form that they obviously became, that would have been a hard act to follow.
And you said that was at Blondie's?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Blondie's had a ton of those bands would come through there, so it wouldn't surprise me. And not to switch gears, but Rob Miller, he's back in my first sentences that we started talking about me getting into music. Rob, I took guitar lessons from Rob, like real early on, like junior high era. Again, he inspired me to play guitar. And
would that have been at the music salon, by the way? Does that name?
Yeah, that was, I was back there and hung out, and we got into a lot of stuff.
Now, getting back to Britain, how long did you play with that group? How long did that last?
From I remember after high school, graduating high school, and then we played a year or two, and then, I don't know, just sort of pooped out. Those guys ended up obviously playing the nucleus of the band, kept together and played a lot. But what had happened is the guy that played drums before Mickey had moved to Florida, and we had gotten asked to drive his car down there with a bunch of stuff. And that sort of was my segue out. That became the next curve, for me as, getting into something else. It was a couple years. I don't know, maybe I played those guys maybe 2 years, 3 years at the most.
And what did you say? Were you singing in that group?
Yep, just singing in that band. And we'd go over to Canada and play with Weapons or Muggsy, whatever that band was.
Yeah.
I never forget me and Mickey St. Clair, they'd put you up in this place. It was like a stripper bar and it was a rock bar. So it's late at night and Mickey would open up the window and run around on the roof, and he'd knock on the window of like the ladies that are, now sleeping. And I just remember the guy coming to a door. I remember him having like a weapon, and as Mickey's coming in through the window, the guy screaming at him, "What are you doing?" And Mickey pulls out, because we had put like mustard in the cold cuts and all that kind of crap out there, and he scooped that all up, and he goes, "Oh, I'm just getting the mustard and and all that stuff."
It sounds like Mickey. I know he did a lot of crazy shit back in the day.
Yeah,
we still
running around the roof.
Story.
He
wasn't naked, was he?
No, I don't remember him having a lot on. I remember it was snowing, so but we got to stay there. It was sort of like, again, cool to be able to do all that fun stuff. But yeah, I played a little bit with them, but it was great to see those fellas go on and do a bunch of stuff together. So that was neat.
Now, do you remember with that band, playing with any national acts, or were you pretty much just playing with other local artists?
Yeah, just local artists. I don't know, whoever was back then we were playing with.
Right.
I remember playing with The Void, which was Vinny Dombrowski, which I ended up playing with later. Doing shows with Seduce, a lot of stuff with those guys, just all whatever those local bars are. Those guys were great. They let a lot of people open with them and give people opportunities. So,
yeah.
But not any national acts.
Did you record anything with Airstrike, Ragdolls, or Briton? Did you actually have any recordings out?
Funny that you say that. We did. We ended up coming down to Florida. We drove down here because our bass player had a friend that their family had a recording studio, a big 24 track recording studio and all this, gear and stuff. So we went down there and we made some recordings. I used to have them somewhere, but tried to we would play more or less, and those were originals, all originals, which is cool. So, but that's probably the first time I ever really went to a recording studio was with all those guys. So,
were you actually writing with those groups also, or did they do the writing and you just sing the songs?
No, we wrote together. I'd come up with the lyrics. Someone always came up with a riff. I really wasn't playing guitar or bass with those guys. I was just singing. I just remember Mike bringing in a riff. We'd, sort of noodle around with it, and then I'd throw my caper on the top. So I totally played in this really heavy metal, glam, power rock band called Tough Luck, and we put out an album. And there's actually a documentary movie about this band, Tough Luck, and what happened to the band. And it was really cool. It's like, it was the era of Guitar Player magazine. The guys that I played with were in there, and the other guy was like a modern drummer. And then there was me still doing the Detroit shtick and, again, being into Alice Cooper. But I got wrapped up in the real heavy metal scene for, I don't know, quite a few years. That band ended up eventually moving to New York, and we did a lot of great stuff. And that band was opening for Dokken and Striper and all those Florida heavy metal bands, Sabotage, and I don't know, just a whole ton of national acts. We played with Pat Travers a lot. That eventually ran its course, and then I came back to Michigan.
Did you record with them? Did they put out a new
record? We put out a record on New Renaissance Record. The lady, her name was Ann Boleyn from the band Hellion, which was an 80s metal band. She had a record label, and she would sign, just a bunch of bands, and somehow we ended up on that record label. So, it is what it is, but it was, a bunch of, sort of demo recordings, and they ended up putting it out. So
then you say you came back to Michigan. Why would anybody come back to Michigan?
I know, right? It's like you can't, I don't know, what's that saying? I don't know. It's like I buried so many bones there. I'm like an old dog. I had to come back and dig them up. So, and that's when I came back to Michigan is when I bumped into the guy that's my mentor still to this day, Joel Martin, and Vinny Dombrowski. And I started to get into filmmaking and, and then Loudhouse. When I auditioned for Loudhouse, they were still called Murder City.
Yeah, I remember Murder City, yeah.
Yep. And then we sort of morphed real quickly into a different band, and then, Loudhouse sort of was born out of all that stuff.
Now, Loudhouse put out only one album, and the real interesting thing to me about that album was that you put out a video for Deep Purple, Smoke on the Water. Now, the thing that's interesting to me about that is the band style is nothing like Deep Purple or anything even close to that. What made you guys decide to cover Smoke on the Water?
Burn. Say yeah. Lake Liza.
Of you.
That's sort of like there's a few answers, and the video was cool though. I directed the
It's
video,
awesome.
and for what it was, the video I think was the better part of the whole end of that deal. So Vinny and I were always doing just off the cuff crazy stuff, and there was an opportunity to write some music for the movie Point Break with Patrick Swayze and Keanu Reeves. So Vinny had been kicking around this idea because we were listening to so much stuff, and then all of a sudden we start hearing Nine Inch Nails and My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, and a lot of these Chicago Pigface and that whole thing.
Sure.
So we thought, why not do something different? And for that movie sound, let's throw a curveball and get into this for a minute because we can. And as we ended up signing to Virgin Records, somebody over there, it wasn't us, was like, thought they had a great idea, and that great idea would be to run with that. And I don't know, wasn't really first choice, I don't think, for anybody, but when that wheel starts spinning, it really starts spinning, and you sort of just, roll with it.
Sure.
And there's only so much you can say or do.
Yeah, well, it was a very interesting version of it, and the video is incredible. Where was the video shot?
I want to mention too, before that, we did release a 45, and we released it on Pumpkins released a record, Bad Brains, and then we put one out. Oh no, Caroline Records. We put out a limited green vinyl. That again, somebody's idea to go, hey, let's put something out before the record so it doesn't look like this band just completely sold out. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So I don't know. And then that's sort of what was the question about the video?
Where was the video shot?
The video was shot. I had found this old haunted house. You remember the JCs, at least back in the day, used to put on these like Livonia JCs, the haunted house. So this was like a building that somebody constructed, and the haunted house was like in there, all the rooms. It was in the middle of sort of like some woods in Farmington Hills where, you couldn't even see it. It was all brush had grown over. Somehow I stumbled upon that place and got permission, got Virgin to give me a bunch of bucks to, I had George Clinton come down. He's in the video. I put my dad's in the video, my dog's in the video, my neighbors. I tried to get the whole town involved, so.
That was very cool, very animated and all that. And it ended up being shown on MTV's, what was that called? The heavy metal show or whatever?
Headbangers Ball.
Headbangers Ball. Yeah, that must have been a real treat to see that, man. You must have really thought, well, wow, I finally made it to the big time.
Well, for me, it would have been, I just think we had so many other cool tunes and I had videos done for a couple other songs, but it's not like I wanted to be ungrateful or anything.
Right, sure.
A lot of people were like, this is the way to go, and you just sort of then at that point lean into it if that's where we're going. But it was fun. I'm not going to lie. It was great. I mean, and the band would start to go out and play. And the cool thing, though, that did come out of that is we could turn around and we would open for, we'd go to Canada with My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult. Then we'd come back and play with the Bad Brains. And then we go to Toronto and play with the Lunatics. Then go and play with Monster Magnet in New York. So it opened up the door because, we could do so many different things. We never, ever played Smoke on the Water live. We experimented with it a few times, and we were just we just sort of moved into a different direction at that point.
Well, that's fine. And I understand possible pressure from a label valuable, especially something that's going to be in a movie.
Yeah.
They'll want you to do something like that. It was an excellent version of it. You know, it was just like, wow, this is different. For the old school cats like me, I know it's Smoke on the Water, but it was such an interesting take on it. It was cool. Not that the other stuff that you guys recorded wasn't. It all was good. There was no doubt about it. Now, so that band obviously toured, as you said, at least Midwest area or whatever.
Yeah, we went to Canada and Midwest, and then we went out to California as well. And
you did play out there also?
Yeah, played out there, played in San Francisco. I can't remember all the places, but, just ran through that whole area.
What happened? What happened to the band? It seemed like it was on the verge of, major success. You had this cover song that was in a movie. You guys are out touring and doing this, and then it just seemed to fizzle. What happened?
Few things from my point of view. We ended up eventually taking on another guitarist, which was Joe Mazzola, great guy and great guitarist. And so now we had the two guitars and we did that. And I had met two people, Warren DeFever from the band His Name's Alive, and he also works at Third Man Records.
He was an Elvis Hitler too.
Yeah, Elvis Hitler, and Davin Brainerd, who is a experimental artist in Detroit. And I started to get into, I just got into different stuff. I started listening to Sun Ra, Lee Scratch Perry, and really got into William S. Burroughs. And I had started called a noise band with Warren and Davin, and we played and opened and toured and did a whole bunch of stuff. We used to blow off quarter sticks of dynamite in the bar. And it was all, we either did a giant puppet show or, Davin had the ability to make these giant Godzillas and robots and noises being made. So that's going on now as the same time Loudhouse is going on. And now Virgin Records is sort of fizzling away, and Richard Branson's what are these guys going to do next? And we're recording, and it sounds really heavy and cool, but it's well, what do we do with these guys now? And then, I don't know, I simply one day talked to Vinny, and we had a conversation. We thought it would be best if I went my separate way, and because I was so animate about the experimental music and experimental filmmaking that I was getting into, that to me, that was just holding me back for what I really wanted to do. And we parted ways, and I've worked with Vinny since. I actually made a Sponge video with Vinny that nobody ever saw, but that's a whole nother story. And then I did a movie, I edited a film, and Vinny lent me music from one of his projects. So always an ace guy. And, I did stuff for Mike Cross, who just passed away. We did video stuff. So I remain friends with all those guys.
Oh, that's very cool. So this experimental thing you're talking about that you're doing with those guys, did that then lead into
right into Mog Stunt Team?
And how did you hook up with Matt Ruffino?
Well, during Loudhouse, I had known Matt since his dad was my doc when I was a kid, a child.
Oh, okay.
And so at some point, I don't know, we'd go to a couple functions that my family would cross paths with his family. So I've known Matt since we were real young kids. And even through Loudhouse, I'd bring Matt up on stage a lot when we play at St. Andrews. It was a cross-pollination like a lot of these bands were. We were really good friends. I thought that there was a cool scene and everyone was playing with everyone and jumping on stage, and Matt would always be around. As we were doing the experimental project, which was called Princess Dragon Mom, PDM, Matt would come and start to lend his hand with that, help us build props, do performances with us. And then that's around the same time I bumped into Scott Goldstein, who played in the Beer Whores and a zillion other great bands, and I sort of formed the Mog Stunt Team out of all that. That's how that all came about.
All right, the big question, or one of the big questions about that with me, I did interview Matt a year or two ago, and he gave his story on it, and I'm interested in hearing your take on it, or the story on it. John Tesh, you guys picked on him and said he was an alien, did this whole thing with him. How did that come about? What was the brainchild behind that, and why John Tesh specifically?
Well, so I believe, if memory is correct, that one day Bill Cozy from the band Speedball and Meanies and a whole bunch of other bands, he had mentioned it in some type of conversation. The word of John Tesh being an alien came out of him, and I got a hold of that, and I was blessed that Scott Goldstein was, this is just as nobody had a laptop. He had like an old Apple computer in there, you know, it was like, had the Star Trek screensaver.
Sure.
And, you know, and then I had Matt who could build and fabricate all these things. I had Joel Martin that gave us like a space. We had this really cool space on 9 Mile next to the Rialto restaurant. It was like the Bat Cave. And we built like a movie set in there and all sorts of stuff. But as the band starts to grow, and that band was doing great. We were playing with Slipknot back then.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Just ton opening for anyone that would come to town. We got a lot of great gigs, but somehow this John Tesh thing just started to snowball and snowball and snowball. Well, he comes to State Theater and we picket him, and I go down there early and I had a couple bucks in my pocket. I hired like, I don't know, 9-10 street guys that were just down on their luck. I'm like, here, I put a picket sign in their hand. So now I got this big picket going on there, and Jay Leno sent a crew out there, and Howard Stern sent a crew out there, and the Free Press. And I wake up the next day and we're on the cover of USA Today. You know, local group calls, accuses John Tesh of being an alien. Tesh ate it up. You know, Tesh would contact us and say, hey, I'm going to be here. But the neat thing is, now we bump into Tom Hazelmeyer from Amphetamine Reptile Records. He grabs a hold of the band. So now a whole huge credibility thing happens to where other people start wanting to pick at John Tesh shows. And so now in Minneapolis, there's a whole nother group. So people start to go, you know, how can these guys be, and, you know, doing, you know, having all these people, and people just, it snowballed into a pretty big thing for a minute. So
I even remember something about him being on the Rosie O'Donnell show or something, and that she brought it up to him and all that. And he kind of played it off as his kind of fun, tongue-in-cheek thing.
She showed him a flyer that we had made like in the back room of the record collector, you know, back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really unique thing, a really unique, cool, gimmicky type of thing as far as that. And Matt had also mentioned something that, and I'm sure this was part of the inner story or whatever, that the FBI or something like that were eyeballing you guys and you faked your death at some motel or something like that to disappear.
That's a whole nother conversation, but I think what I would say to that is there's a documentary about the band called I'm Gonna Do It Till the Day I Die. And if you search that, I'm Gonna Do It Till the Day I Die, Mog Stunt Team, I think it's in enough places where you can just watch it, and sort of explains what happened to the band, or what supposedly happened to the band.
John was a good man, so he kissed his dog and he walked in. I was over there in Missouri. Figured we'd run over here and play Zeke. It's nice to be in the illustrious town of Kansas City. This song's called Curse Go Back. It's for William S. Burroughs.
I hear you're working or have been working on a new album. Is that coming about or is that done? Is it in production? What's going on with that?
Well, there's a few things. Scott and Matt and I recently, within the last few months, they came down and visited me down south here in South Florida. And we did some rehearsing and had some great conversations. And then Mog had a whole bunch of music that never saw the light of day. And one song that we had that was really interesting is we did a remake of Fly Like an Eagle with Eddie Hirsch from the Black Crowes and more, all the great blues stuff that he did in Detroit. And we got recordings like that we thought might be neat to do something with. So we did noodle around with some new stuff. The fellas and I threw down some new material. I'm hoping in the next interim that we start to do something, and where we can release all this stuff together and maybe possibly even do some shows together. That's the goal. So we'll see what happens.
Well, Kenny, I'm going to let you go. Really, really enjoyed talking to you. I'm sorry it took so long for us to connect and all that, but I'm glad we actually did. And I wish you the best. I hope you can put out some more recordings because the stuff I've heard is just mind-blowing. It's incredible stuff. I love the whole stick with John Tesh and all that with that. And I just wish you the best, man. Just wish you the best.
Same to you, man. And I've watched so many of your videos. I went down the rabbit hole, like just seeing all these old bands and it's like, you're housing all this stuff. I watched some really cool old Seduce videos and just all these other bands, and it just brought back a lot of cool memories. So right on to you, and may the force be with you. And appreciate what you're doing, man. Rock and roll.
Rock and roll, definitely. All right, Kenny, you have a good night, buddy.
Yep, rock and roll. Take care.
Take care. All right, that was Kenny Five, originally from the Detroit metropolitan area. Like he said, he grew up in Livonia. I didn't know he had played with Ed Hillman. I didn't know he knew Corey Clark's Warrior Soul, one of my favorite bands of all time. And he's done so much. I mean, starting out playing with Chuck Burns, who later on went into, obviously, Seduce, in a band called Airstrike, a band called Briton, that, whether he remembers it or not, there is a flyer out from Blondie's where it says Pantera opened for them, which is possible. It's possible Pantera in their early age, maybe nobody knew of them yet. And, of course, the Ragdolls, another band that he played in, and of course, then jumping into the big time, more or less, at least as far as the Detroit scene, with Loudhouse. I mean, Loudhouse was huge in this area, huge, and of course, they did this Smoke on the Water video, in that movie he mentioned, Point Blank, and then going on to the Mog Stunt Team time. That stuff is just incredible. If you haven't heard any of that, you really need to check it out. Go on to Spotify or I'm sure it's probably on the other streaming services also, but go check that out and check out the whole story behind the John Tesh UFO alien conspiracy theory thing on YouTube. There's, like you mentioned, there's videos on it talking about it because it was a national thing for a while there. It got some press, and it definitely helped the band build up a little bit more and probably get more better gigs and whatnot. But very interesting. Obviously, incredible filmmaker because he did that video for Smoke on the Water, and I wish him the best. I hope that he can come out maybe in the next year or so with some Mog Stunt Team material or, recordings, whether they be older or newer stuff. It doesn't matter. It's just some really interesting stuff. And when it comes out, you'll want to hear it. Is that old stereo of yours giving you the blues? Maybe the receiver has a blown channel, or the turntable just doesn't work right. Well, then you should visit my friends at 7 Grand Audio Service. They've been in business for over 40 years. Located at 25642 7 Mile Road The owner Dash and his assistant Harry can fix just about anything. Old, new, vintage, whatever, they can fix it. Receivers, tape decks, turntables, EQs, power amps, and yes, guitar and bass amps. The phone number over there is 313-533-3635. They're open Monday through Friday, 10 to 6. If you have any kind of audio or stereo issues whatsoever, you need to check them out and tell them Jimmy sent you. Anyway, with that being said, as I always say, keep rocking.